A recent interdisciplinary project, Listen Here Now, sought to determine in what ways local soundscapes signify and impact the biodiversity, health, and livability of Groningen as a rapidly changing urban city. During 1 year, students and researchers from the fields of biology, ecology, cultural geography, arts and culture, and physics recorded and mapped the soundscapes of especially nature-rich areas such as parks and forest reserves. Our goal was to explore contrasting soundscapes to develop an innovative participatory approach towards ecological sustainability in urban settings. We incorporated a creative and musical component to aestheticize local soundscapes and provoke new knowledge about interspecies subjectivities and forms of wildness in the urban forest. More broadly, our soundscape approach provided the focus for a larger project exploring solutions to alter the trend of decreased wild spaces in cities, a phenomena expanding sonically deficient areas and diminishing the biodiversity and livability of local neighborhoods. Influenced by acoustic ecology, a field recognizing the value of sonic epistemes, our project was designed to increase ecological consciousness as well as stimulate interventions into current policy to promote conservation and biodiversity through sound art. The project's artistic practice-based research and soundscape performances offered forms of aesthetic enjoyment, but they also drew attention to the sonic identity and heritage of this place and encouraged forms of climate action. And last year I got to spend 5 wonderful months in Australia, and I became enamored with the sounds of local birds. So to get a sense of the urban forest of places like Canberra and Sydney, I'm going to give you a little taste of what that might have been like to be there. As eminent environmental sound artist and researcher Leah Barclay reveals, participatory sound art can encourage listeners to engage with ecosystems and facilitate embodied connections with the environment. For Barclay and others, such collaborations, while educational, provide direct pathways for listeners to take actions and to connect with conservation organizations. While the scientific data is clear regarding the potential for urban environments to offer wild spaces for biodiversity and well-being, it's often the affective connotations and forms of placemaking stimulated by personal reflections of urban nature that motivate their implementation. As Barclay claims, participatory acoustic ecology projects which seek to value artistic, aesthetic, and scientific perspectives. To highlight the scientific, artistic, and aesthetic, we developed a 4-step process including mapping, recording, listening, discussing, analyzing, walking, and creative improvisations. Our multidisciplinary framework enlisted approaches such as sound appraisal, urban tree cover mapping, birdsong analysis, sound walks, artistic recordings, and even workshops. So I just want to introduce this fantastic app. Has anyone ever tried the Merlin app? Yeah, one of you. So download it, sit in your balcony, garden, and you can recognize the sounds of birds, and then you can figure out what kinds of birds those are. I love to do that in the morning when I'm drinking coffee. It's very easy to use, and it shows you a little spectrogram. So you begin to sort of associate certain bird calls with, the images of these spectrograms. Our creative engagement with soundscape recordings aspired towards more than human worldings and interspecies kin making, in order to amplify those most under-recognized and underrepresented within urban landscapes and planning directives. Ultimately, we sought to better comprehend our local soundscape to support all related life forms for future flourishing of interspecies connectivity in an era of mass extinction and environmental emergencies. Throughout her study of the Australian peat butcherbird, zoo musicologist Hollis Taylor makes connections to human, animal, musical, and cultural practices, highlighting animal music as a means of producing place. She claims, quote, "Sound artists and peat butcherbirds are known to sonify their neighborhoods. Ensemble songs and dialect speak to where birds are from, and avian solo songs can be framed as statements of power that register a territory. Both have correspondence to placemaking song or a national anthem." So the peat butcherbird that we heard was claiming territory, but also creating music together. Throughout the study of various soundscapes, from the anthrophonic to the sounds of agricultural machinery, and finally to biophony, and especially the chatter and song of bird vocalizations, we aimed to reprioritize the life worlds of local urban environments and their transforming and sometimes disappearing habitats. In the following, I'll focus primarily upon the project's creative stage, especially the eco-critical improvisatory soundscape methods attuned towards stimulating sonic attachments through slow listening, response ability, and interspecies kin-making. The process of developing music performances in dialogue with local field recordings of biodiversity were intended to recapture a dramatic sense of the wild. To situate our rewildings through improvised soundscape performances, first, a review of pre-existing soundscape-driven music genres, such as lounge and exotica, reminds us of the othering and commodification of nature in many previous wild Western genres. We adapted some of these styles' aesthetic impulses, yet attempted to defamiliarize their underlying power imbalances to eradicate the masculinized consumption of exoticized wild objects. A core technique emerging from the project was slow listening. By engaging students in altered modes of attention, we offered a manner in which participants, through Pauline Oliveros' deep listening, forged more binding attachments to their city of residence. Chattopadhyay and Waterman and others highlight the critical role that listening, such as through hyper-listening and co-listening, can perform in undermining the objectifying or commodifying organization of cities. By listening attentively and in ways circumventing the expected contours of capitalist infrastructures, we incorporate listening as an emancipatory or disruptive intervention in these logics. We further facilitate alternative urban interactions by acknowledging the sounds produced between ourselves and those non-humans in our midst. Chattopadhyay advocates for the role of the artist and how they can inspire engaging listening as an emancipatory act characterized by intensified social, religious, and political issues and a global environmental crisis. All of these centered on issues of disconnection. The incorporation of those ideas of listening, recording, and engaging with not only anthropogenic sources, but also to local animals, plants, and ecosystems contributes to an increased awareness of the interrelated ecological and cultural value of urban soundscapes for one's sense of belonging in one's community. Our transformation of retrieved soundscapes afforded us a generative art practice. This project's generative practice explored and highlighted sound's critical relation to Groningen as a valuable place, one in which affective ties are generated through kinesthetic, sensorial, and physical relations, as well as individual connections such as through personal emotions, memories, and imaginations. These projects offer an important forum in which to transmit this knowledge to locals for a more engaged sensing of place. Because of the expertise in the group in relation to bird communication, we chose to focus upon bird and bat song in relation to tree-dense areas in the city. The study of forest-related soundscapes had previously included bird song, the forest song of indigenous peoples, or the study of songs connected to cultural networks of fungi in disturbed forest. More recently, researchers have recorded trees' internal networks through techniques such as electric caliper amplification. Such micro-soundscapes and their generation in creative forms reflect transformations in interspecies entanglements, especially in relation to a reawakening of ecological consciousness. Our multifaceted approach therefore enhances local understandings of the critical role of the urban forest in cities. According to tree mapping firm Cobra Groen, in 2021, Groningen had a tree cover ratio of 12.8%. This in a country with a deforestation rate greater proportionally than the deforestation of the Amazon. Do you know what your local tree cover ratio is in your city? If you don't, you should find out. In fact, due to the widespread industrial agriculture, cities in the Netherlands often boast higher rates of biodiversity than in the countryside. And here in the lesser populated surrounding province, the tree cover ratio is only 8%. This discrepancy is no longer surprising as land use in the provinces is largely exploited for intensive and therefore low biodiversity farming at 80%, and especially dairy farming, which is exported at 80%. And contributes to only 1% of the economy. With a mapping tool called iTree Tools, assessments are made regarding the various values gained from trees in the urban forest, including water filtration, air pollution removal, carbon sequestration, reduced medical cost, and reduced air conditioning cost. Our focus upon birdsong within Groningen's urban forest illuminated the ecosonic heritage of particular wild areas, while drawing attention to the biodiversity that they support. So our study focused upon two parks, the Stadspark and the Noorderplantsoen, plus one nature reserve outside of the city. We compared these areas to the most concretized area in the market square, which we're going to go to later today, and then we compared them by highlighting the different nature spaces in the city. We drew attention to how critical they were for our well-being, but also as places sonically and ecologically unique, lively, and connected to the more than human of the region. And here's one of the parks that we made our recordings in. It looks very beautiful in the fall. A focus on sound studies research reflects the so-called material turn in which sound's abstract and purely material qualities supersede other concerns, such as the cultural, ecological, gendered, and social context of sound media production and dissemination. Marie Thompson points not only to the whiteness of sound studies and its colonial legacy, but to the elisions of other kinds of sonic knowledge predating colonialism. She states, quote, "The rush to position new realist and materialist trends as a theoretical vanguard has resulted in the sidelining of significant antecedents. The materialisms, non-anthropocentrism, and more than human actors of indigenous cosmologies, the inhumanisms and alternative humanisms of decolonial and Black scholarship, and the speculative tendencies of various feminisms. Our discussion of these histories and anthropogenic epistemologies informed how we researched the places we encountered in the urban setting. They redirected our attention back to the local and the interdependence between not only powerful humans and those less represented in the body politic, but also between the human, the underrepresented, and the more than human. The final stage of our participatory project entailed working with field recordings of the urban forest to co-create an imagined, interactive, improvisatory soundscape. This process demanded listening to recordings, talking about birdsong, and contemplating creative approaches. Improvisation and soundscape performance emerged as one path towards refiguring the affective and imagined cultural ties we have to the wild. One strategy involved revising or intervening in the heavily gendered and racialized hierarchies of exotic genres from the 1950s, spearheaded by creative composer-producers such as Martin Denny and Les Baxter. In this sense, the wild, animal-filled recordings of Denny and Baxter provided the launchpad for us to reimagine the urban jungle beyond the masculinist vantage point of American bachelors. Baxter's lushly produced Quiet Village and Denny's Stranger in Paradise incorporated imitations of birdsong with languid and repetitive percussive textures and jazz lounge beats. Indicating the massive popularity of the studio-driven style, Denny's album reached number 21 on the mono charts in 1959 and number 12 on the stereo charts, so they had mono charts and stereo charts back then. Each of these albums interwove imagined fragments of faraway jungles into a modernist, easy-listening framework, seamlessly filtered through sophisticated studio production techniques. Through centuries conflating women with reductive notions of nature as chaotic and unruly, in the 1950s post-war American music and television landscape, mediascape, women's bodies were incorporated into male fantasies of an untamable jungle. In these representations, women accommodated roles as alluring cat women, donning wild prints, leopard skins, and beaded headdresses. One popular version was depicted by actor Irish McCalla, who portrayed Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, in the 1950s. Her highly popular characterization served to sustain the post-war erotic woman untamed nature dualism through the 1960s. But given the domestic cat's uneasy relationship with bird life in the urban forest, the feline metaphor ironically belied women's ongoing role as sexual objects via wild media fantasies that failed to sustain real wild spaces afar or locally in the concrete jungle. Yet McKella's interspecies kin-making with her co-star Neil disrupted the expected boundaries between humans and non-humans in American media culture. As Francesco Adenolfi points out, bachelors combined consumerist identifications with remote jungles through investments in the latest audio technologies. Conflations of the exotic and erotic when designed for bachelors not only populated vinyl covers, but decorated urban leisure spaces such as tiki bars and restaurants. These places were initiated sometimes by VI vets from the South Pacific, GI vets. These bars often featured live music and created fantasies about faraway islands. Martin Denny apparently performed in Las Vegas lounges and was often asked to tone down his wild bird calls and exotic jungle sounds so as not to disturb the gamblers. The exotica post-war soundscape, as revealed by feminist cultural historian Barbara Ehrenreich, was intended to colonize the domestic space for the imagined remote, racially colored and sexualized spectacles of the vibrant soundscapes of Tahiti, Martinique, Hawaii, and Yangon, places with colonial histories of biophonic extraction and sexual exploitation. These imagined spaces did little to recover the wildness of man and of men's primal sexuality, but rather created new commercial markets for the traffic in exoticist images of women, of wild animals, and of indigenous peoples. So our improvisatory soundscape approach acknowledges our privileged position in the academy and connection to the musical legacies and practices of soundscape-driven exoticist art. Yet we aim to intervene, incorporating a critical feminist lens by highlighting retrospectively the essentializing and sexualizing objectification central for these earlier genres. Given our connection to this legacy, yet admiring the artful production aesthetics and animal-inspired performances of Denny and others, we draw attention to this period as one instrumental in bringing the sounds of non-humans into popular music practice in the global north. Yet the Listen Here Now project sought to renovate the othered connotations of the jungle to adopt the concept of wildness as a living entity within the urban forest. While the tropical forest as an imagined geography had been manipulated through studio effects, the lo-fi quality of our soundscape recordings act as testaments and traces of percolating life worlds in our midst. By improvising with bird calls during performances, these recordings afforded us new ways of animating the wild implicit through interspecies connections with the urban forest. But these sounds can also conjure the wild and exotic within ourselves. So I'm just going to conclude now and then end with just a couple of seconds with one of our performances, which took place in one of the parks, an art festival, and we worked with musicians from the Prince Claus Conservatory, and we improvised to some of the soundscapes. So Further, by recreating some aspects of this fantasy of creative interspecies musical play through improvisation, we acknowledge that speculative ecological fantasies have a place in environmental activism. By drawing attention to our complacency in the transformation and displacement of critical habitat locally, and of this situatedness of this transformation to global trends such as the murder or extraction of wild species from their native biotopes, and the othering of reductive representations of indigenous cultures from the global south, we initiate a process of reflection, critique, and agitation for change. The goal of such musical projects then resist projecting a sexualized and racialized fantasy of the wild from our privileged positions. They motivate us to make ourselves more response-able and connected to the local community of living beings. In Staying with the Trouble, Donna Haraway further expands her notion of responsibility to encourage contextually situated and ecologically contingent engagements and interactions with non-human animals. These situated forms of responsibility invite us to understand the unique context of animal cohabitation and to contemplate and engage in actions which care for and ethically situate these beings as equals and as always constituent of urban nature. And I'll just play a few seconds here. This is our little jam. That's us, and thank you very much for listening.